Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Chapter 6, Cultural Geography. You can see up here I have a list of slang terms by decades. It's not an exhaustive list. I picked out maybe what I felt were the most popular, the most interesting. 1950s, you can see some of the terms here that were good to go, right? Daddy-o, out of sight. 1960s, groovy. Groovy kind of crosses over into the 70s. Um, but Here we go. Bigot, right? Hang loose, make out. I remember that one. I was a little young in the 60s, 70s. I kind of came into my own in the 70s, but I remember that was kind of crossed over too. Did you make out with her? Did you make out with him? Uh, 1970s, yeah, and some more really, I guess all these decades have some really dumb terms to them, right? Right on, far out. 1980s, gag me with a spoon. Um, that came with the Valley Girl um, movement, if you want to call it that, early 80s. Um, so, Airhead, 1990s, tripping, raise the roof, don't go there. And kind of getting into the decades that you folks are used to, 2000s. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if these are exact fits for the 10-year periods I'm looking at here, though. But you guys would know more about that than I would as we get into these last two decades, right? What's up, right? I mean, things there that I've heard of. Um, Cougar, right? That's where middle-aged women are seeking younger guys. Selfies, photobombs, deets, right? I didn't know about that one. Details, um, tweets, unfriend, memes, emojis, right? May seems to be May. I think that's been around for a little while, but dabbing, right? That's something like this. This gotta get the hand up over the face, right? My daughter was trying to teach me that a while back. Woke, right? All right. So get your lecture models out and get ready to go here. Make my switch over to that and boom, there we go. Cultural Geography, Chapter 6. We're going to differentiate between the components of culture in this chapter, explain the subsystems of culture, understand change in culture and its diversity, and identify the amount of languages that make up the Earth's cultural landscape. That'll be your lab. That'll be your lab. Major heads up terms here for this chapter. Culturation, right? Culturation. Should have probably had that down farther, but culturation, kind of a major facelift to one's culture, one's minority culture inside a dominant culture. And culture, that's the specialized behavior patterns, understandings, and adaptations that kind of summarize someone's way of life, of a group of people. Culture trait. These are the learned behaviors of culture. Culture complex is when you take a bunch of culture traits, bundle them up, and you get a culture complex, right? Um, I guess I'll elaborate on that when we get there. Let me see. Environmental determinism. Environmental determinism, the idea that you are shaped by your environment. You got a bad environment, not too much you're gonna be able to do about it, right? Good environment, it's gonna be hard to mess that up. Possibilism is kind of the opposite of that. Possibilism is you could kind of you have the power and control to determine culture, determine your local culture and your life, in essence. Subsystems of culture, and there are three subsystems of culture: the technological, the sociological, and the ideological. And technological deals with things we use. Sociological deals with expected behaviors, and the ideological expected ways we're supposed to believe things. And we're kind of going through a shift right now, I think, in this country in that regard. Innovation. We're dealing there with kind of looking maybe at modernizing, making technical improvements. Okay, again, that's why I wanted to have culturation maybe down farther on the list, because when I have those two um, in connection with each other during a lecture, nevertheless, not a big deal. Culture hearth, right? People move into a certain area, and via their cultural beliefs, they end up augmenting and changing, um, um, the way um, their environment looks, right? The way their environment looks with, cultural icons and symbolism. Could go, religion could do that, and we'll talk about that. I'll leave that alone for now. Speaking of religions, you have three of them: universalizing religions, open to everyone. But then you have your tribal and ethnic religions that, right, and if you're not part of the particular tribe or an ethnicity, which are your IDs, it's going to be difficult to get into all that, to those religions. Ethnicity and race. Ethnicity is kind of like the social status, one social status afforded to a minority group, and race, very different, right? A kind of a subset of people that share certain distinctive, inherited biological characteristics. So let's get into this here: components of culture, and just quickly state this as a setup here. Culture is we're talking about culture, we're talking about the totality of learned behavior and material items of a society, your culture traits, complexes, and regions are basic spatial expressions of all this human differentiation. Let's look at the notes here, or the fills. And components of culture is handed down to younger generations. And it's handed down through imitation, handed down through instruction, and handed down by example. Has nothing at all to do with biology, and it's certainly not genetic. Okay, it's a learned behavior. Page 142, figure 6.1 has a visual depicting this, as you guys know I like to do, right? Have those visuals in there. Culture groups learn societal norms. And we're talking about societal norms. We're talking about, how to behave, um, social perceptions, and understandings of available technologies, And this all depends on, what age you're at, um, your gender, your status, and your occupation. So these will frame the overall cultural picture. Speaking of that frame, the framework. Culture also provides a framework of those roles. Culture traits. Culture traits. This is learned behavior. Culture traits, learned behavior, ranging from the tools that one uses to what language is spoken. For example, the objects that are used, the techniques, beliefs, and attitudes. And then we're getting There, swerving into, I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, the subsystems of culture. Your culture complex. Culture complex is where you combine all those culture traits. For example, in keeping cattle in Kenya, keeping cattle in Kenya is part of the culture, and personal wealth is measured by the cattle that is owned. The diet consisted of cattle. Therefore, and these are traits. Therefore, a culture complex comes in the fact of there's disrespect for someone not related to related to cattle herding. And this gets in a little bit, jumping a gun here a little bit, but the ideological subset of culture here in the United States of America, I think it's still a culture trait to be independent. It's a culture trait to be own your own home. So therefore, a culture complex, and you see somebody 35 or 40 living with their parents, loser comes out, right? Where so many other cultures around the globe can live together, for a lifetime, right? Layers of generations. Don't you guys jumping ahead, cheating? Want you to listen to what I'm saying because for you auditory learners, this will be helpful to you. This is the medicine, right? I'm giving you. Environmental determinism. I want to get into interaction of people and environment. And environmental determinism. That's the belief there that environment shapes humans. Possibilism, humans shape culture. The thing about possibilism is, and I would say this too, these viewpoints have shifted. 60s and 70s, it leaned heavily toward environmental determinism. In the 90s and the 2000s, maybe it shifted where humans, personal responsibility, you can shape culture. It's kind of now about the pendulums, I think, in the middle, someplace. Well, here's the thing about possibilism. If the impetus is not there to utilize the environment, then one is going to be hostage to their lack of knowledge or will. And that's why I've always said, I mean, capitalism in earnest probably began with the Protestant Reformation. I know Luther, it started with Luther in Germany, but then you had a second tier of that, not that long after in Geneva, Switzerland under John Calvin. And there you had the big emphasis on New Testament teachings about laziness, and if you don't go out and work, it's sin. And I think capitalism began during that time period. And then if you take a look, you couple that with the later on the Puritans who adopted much of that philosophy too, coming over here to the United States, merging that with all the natural resources we had over here. It's probably no secret, that it was a springboard to become the nation's or the world's richest nation in history, right? Via standards of living, according, you know, looking at standards of living. Talk about the subsystems of culture. Just set this up by saying that because the subsystems of culture are themselves complexes of these individual traits, individual items in any of the subsystems cannot easily be isolated from that cultural mosaic, right? Or that tossed salad of cultures. The term cultural integration suggests what's the word I want to look for? Interlocking. The interlocking nature of all aspects of a culture. So cultures are most easily identified by their characteristic ideological, subsystems. And we talk about ideological, we're talking about doctrines and opinions, particularly by language and religion. Now, the component subsystems of a culture are one, the technological subsystem of material objects and the techniques for their use to satisfy needs of food, clothing, and shelter. Secondly, the second subsystem of culture is the sociological subsystem, representing the totality of expected and accepted patterns of institutional and interpersonal relations. And thirdly, the ideological subsystem of beliefs and ideas of a culture and the language to express and transmit them. Now, along with these three subsystems, you have this cultural divergence, if you will, that marked early phases of differential development. Different tools, different, people use different tools depending on where they live. The cultural convergence, therefore, is evident among modern societies, especially when they're sharing the same technologies. Let's take a look at this. The three-part subsystem of culture. Technological deals with inanimate objects and how they're used and how they help folks live, right? How they're used in relation to things like building shelter. Page 146, figure 6.4 gives you a visual example of that. Secondly, the sociological set. This is your interpersonal relations that culminate in like social organizations. I'm thinking VFW, Catholic Church, figure 6.8 on page 149 kind of gives you four pictures of different cultures of folks, training their children to drive or, teaching them how to drive, do several things there. And then the ideological subsystem, the thoughts and outlooks about how, a culture should be, right? About and on a culture and how they're expressed. Figure 610, page 151. And there's no question we're undergoing a change right now in our culture. I had a friend saying the other day that the economy was booming before COVID. He felt that we were making big inroads on um, immigration. Trade deals were out of whack. They were getting straightened out. We were energy dependent now, and ISIS was gone, and Kim Jong Un and North Korea was quiet. And how can we, kick the president out of office for that? And I, not agreeing or disagreeing with him, I thought, well, I think we're undergoing a culture change. I mean, I don't know if a large majority of the country, I mean, we're globalizing. I think that's one of the bases for maybe not everyone being on board with the former president. We're globalizing and make America great, right? Maybe make America great is embarrassing to a lot of people, right? So, I mean, um, I think we're undergoing a change right now ideologically. Culture change and cultural diversity, cultural change and cultural diversity. Um, Change is constantly occurring in cultures, and that's the result of innovation. We talk about innovation. It's the ideas created within the social group. Spatial diffusion is the spread of ideas from an origin point to new areas. And we've mentioned that word before, diffusion, in previous chapters, or we mentioned again. Last time, maybe I'll say it. Maybe not. I don't know. Diffusion, we're talking about the spread of something, okay? And then you have acculturation. Acculturation, the adoption by a subordinate group pardon me, of dominating group characteristics. Cultural change. Break this down here for you guys. Innovation, right? When a social group within a culture modernizes and makes technological improvements of new ideas, this is known as innovation. This is known as innovation. I brought that down too quickly. One of the auditory learners to hear me first. Of course, you can pause it, right? I've said this before. You can pause it after you write it and listen to me. Yeah, and with innovation, I remember. Well, it's still ongoing. And a classic example of this. And you have to bear with me. I'm a big music guy. I am an older guy who every Friday goes on Spotify. They have a thing called New Music Friday, and I go down that list of about 100 songs, see what's going on, play bits and pieces of them, and put it into my playlist, and eventually, buy some of them. Now, about 3 songs out of 100 actually make it into the second round for me, but some big music person, and I remember like in African American culture, you had um, a series of phases. In certain areas, you had funk in the 60s and the 70s, and then that turned into disco, and that turned into record scratching, which turned into rap music, which is, kind of um, blossomed out in these tributaries of hip hop and some other things, right? That I'm not quite familiar with anymore today, but that'd be an example, great example, I think, of innovation. Acculturation occurs when one culture adopts so much of another's culture that one undergoes a major facelift, major change. Language. Now you're going to notice here. I don't have any notes for language, and usually when I don't have notes for something, I certainly do not focus on it with the labs. I am going to do it this time. Your lab will deal with language. Language is just really important, right? It's a major influencer of culture, but I just can't cover everything. Right? I think I had my 4 concepts, and I didn't want to go to a fifth. I thought, well, I gotta factor, something. I gotta factor language in, so I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it with the labs. No, I mean, we'll live. It's not the end of the world if I don't talk about it as a breakdown here. But I do want to say, um, just kind of getting away from. Oh, I know what I want to talk about. Before I get there, I want to talk about culture hearts. We'll get into language in a second here. Complete complete cultural uniformity within a national society. Um, that shouldn't be assumed. That shouldn't be assumed. You have your folk cultures out there, and page 163, your authors have a little reading about that, which it might be cool to check out. Folk cultures preserve traditional and non-faddish ways of life, and they remain largely isolated from the surrounding majority. Then you have your popular culture that readily adopts, conforms to, and even abandons uh, ever-changing fads and behaviors, characteristic of the general mass of modern society. And so you have these source regions of such early societal and technical revolutions as agriculture and urbanization called culture hearts. So your culture hearts, and you see your fills there, culture hearts, this is where a particular culture's innovations help create a particular cultural landscape. For example, with physical characteristics of a place, you go to Saudi Arabia, right, where the faith and religion of Islam started, in Medina and Mecca. Well, you're going to see that landscape dotted with mosques, turbans, right? New England here, you had your Ivy League schools began in New England. So it's kind of an education culture hearth, New England, as a result. And you could Silicon Valley, out in Frisco, Oakland area. In that area there, you have a culture hearth of the tech industry. So you have new traits of culture. New traits of culture are often characterized by culture hearths. Again, East, right? Writing, record keeping, trade, arithmetic, government, astronomy, all kind of developed there. In a cultural geographic sense, innovation refers to a social group within a culture modernizing, making technological improvements, or coming up with new ideas. As I just said, with the Afro American musical culture, kind of just whether you like the music or not, it's just really impressive to watch the different phases that has evolved. Now I'm gonna start swerving into language in a moment here, but rejection of change. Rejection of change is cultural lag, they call it, and that occurs though more commonly. Um, the fusion when you have the fusion of old and new ideas. Acculturation and syncretism, which is the fusion of old and new ideas, represent the adoption of blending by a culture of the characteristics of, some other society, another society. Language, religion, where we're going now, and ethnicity, they're immediate and enduring evidences of cultural distinctiveness, cultural evolution, and diffusion. There we go again. Race, that's a genetic matter, right, and has no meaning in considerations of culture. Now, language. I jumped the gun on that, but language, don't have it here in the expert. You're not going to break it down here. You will examine it somewhat with a lab, but I just want to say this about language. About language, thousands of languages exist, and you'll see this with your lab. But linguistic diversity is reduced by recognizing language families. Okay, so present world linguistic patterns kind of reflect past migrations and conquests, right? Languages they're dynamic. They change through several things. They change through isolation. They change through cultural contact, and they change through time. A speech community may have a standard language and social and regional dialects. Toponymy, that's where you study place names and it helps trace migrations and um, population change. You have pigeons, not to be confused with the pigeons that walk on like a boardwalk or something. Pigeons, Pidgins. That's a simplistic form of a group of languages. And then you have Creoles. Creoles, that's where languages evolve through the loss of one's native tongue, through lack of usage. And then you have what we call lingua franca, right? Lingua franca, and they are languages developed or adopted to foster communication between speakers of different tongues. It's basically an established language for a nation, which we do not have here in the United States. I think it was in 2006. That was try to push through as a law, try to be pushed through as a law. I remember it failing in the House of Representatives. Didn't even make it to the Senate. I think it was 2006. And then lastly, let's take a look at religion. Or wait a minute, religion and I want to get to the ethnicity. Now, with religion, geographers classify religion as universalizing, ethnic, and tribal. The universalizing religions, faiths, they're the most widely distributed. Your ethnic religions, they're most closely identified with specific regions and cultures. Okay, tribal religions, they're being lost primarily through absorption and conversion, right? Conversion to universalizing religions. So each of the limited number of major religions has its mix of cultural values and perhaps diffusion patterns. So your principal religions looked at here are Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, and some East Asian ethnic religions. Let's break it down for what you need to know for the quiz and other things. Religion's related to it's related to each of the subsystems that I mentioned earlier because it has messages of salvation, influencing tradition and a culture. The economy is affected as well. In certain countries, there are restrictions on food and drink, even dress, right? For example, women in the Mideast. I remember 9/11. When 9/11 happened, you guys were very young, maybe not born yet. One of the many reasons, I mean, if you took a pie and cut it up in pieces on why that happened that day, one of the reasons was that that part of the world, they were nervous about the globalization of our culture infiltrating that part of the world and, an infidel culture. And I remember, that right when that happened, we were sending over our reporters, and some of the female reporters were dressed up as if they were in negligees. And I was like, oh, slapping my head. I'm like, this is exactly what we should not be doing, right? In that part of the world. I digress a little bit there, but if you take a look at women's garb in that part of the world, I mean, the messages you're to be seen and not heard, right? Universalizing religions are open to anyone. They have symbols to denote membership and encourage missionary work. Ethnic religions are those closed to ethnicity. Therefore, there's no need to proselytize. The group ID is the symbol. And then your tribal religions have close ties to nature, uh, no ties to politics or ethnic identity. For example, animism, rocks and trees, shamanism. You may have druids and powerful chieftains in a particular village. And then lastly, here we go. Lastly, ethnicity. Ethnicity is, well, let me just say this, setting this up. Ethnicity refers to populations distinguished by common origins, if you will, and distinctive cultural or racial traits, okay? And it's a spatial concept. It's, recognized homeland areas, urban enclaves, or even rural settlement districts. These things are the rule. Gender implies social, not biological, distinctions between male and female roles. Those roles are cultural and spatial variables affected by a society's economic stage, religion, and customary behaviors. In their variability, gender relationships add another important dimension to cultural geographic differentiation. Now, ethnicity is a nation. We're talking about a nation, and an ancestry of folks who have and adopt traits associated with their heritage. Italian Americans, Kwanzaa at Christmas time for African Americans, some African Americans. Race is a subset of folks with common biological and physical characteristics that set them apart from others. And then culture, right? Culture, there are just different ways of life to each culture, and this can be seen in behavior, practices, and perceptions of that particular group. And you can see here through this lecture all of these different social sciences, right, under the umbrella of geography, right, which therefore it makes it, as I say, king of the social sciences. Don't forget that. Now, your graphic organizer, um, you can get that out and look at the I meant to get that out and talk about it. Forgot to do that. But you guys have one for you visual types, right? Look at your graphic organizer. We'll recap the lesson. I want to talk about what's up ahead. And here we go. All right. Tuesday video. I want you to see ethnic and tribal religion. I have a short video. These things are about, generally about 3 to 4 minutes, right? Incorporate that if you can in your discussion question. And I want you to read page 157. Page 157 has a reading on a homemade culture. And this augments what I talked about regarding, acculturation and innovation. So look to incorporate that into the discussion questions in some form or fashion. So you have a reading, you have a video. Wednesday, I'm going to give you guys an application exercise, a really cool one, I think, that has you apply the subsets of culture, right? The subsets of culture to various examples. So you'll take a look at that. This will be a little deeper than a comprehension exercise, but it'll give you a chance to work through some of the major concepts. Thursday, you're going to have a lab on languages, right? Stepping out of the norm there a little bit, right? As I said. Friday, I want to talk about this. I forgot to talk about it last time on chapter 5. This is not happening in some cases, but your initial post, folks, is due on Friday, right? Some of you guys have been losing some points because you're not on time with the initial post by Friday night. You need to do that before we get to the halfway point of the course. And then Sunday night, your 2 response posts are due. Everyone knows that part. But one of the reasons I want the I want the initial posts in by Friday is because I don't allow you to post responses until that's done. And if you're not posting your initial post until late Sunday, and a lot of you guys have good things to say, but you're doing it late, right? And then other people cannot jump in because they're already done, right? They're already finished. They can't jump in and glean from what you have to say. So that's why, my medicine's a little strong there. Monday, right, we quiz, and then we begin human interaction on chapter 7 and further prove why geography is just so awesome. So, all right, that's it for here. And again, you guys, any questions, comments, concerns outside of Sunday, I am around, right, fairly regularly to take on those concerns and questions. Otherwise, you guys have a fantastic week as always. Do well, and see you next time. Bye.